So we're outside. We're standing here in the BMA Sculpture Garden, and we're looking at Shiva Nataraja.
So what are we looking at, Angie Mae?
Lana, what does it look like to you?
It looks like a man, very shapely yet slim, dancing, and he has multiple arms.
It's funny that you definitely call out man, because the amount of people that have referred to Shiva as she because of exactly what you're talking about. And the reason why it is this kind of slender and almost feminine-like quality is just the idea of idol beauty from southern India. But yeah, when I look at this sculpture, the first thing I think of is that crane kick from the Karate Kid, the 80s Karate Kid, obviously. So if we're being serious, what we're looking at when we say Shiva Nataraja, it's the Hindu god Shiva. And Nata means dance, and Raja means king or lord.
So he's the lord of the dance, like the Irish guy.
Yes, exactly like the Irish guy, but, probably a little more skillful, a little more powerful, more beautiful. But he's the king of dance. This is definitely the king of dance.
So what does dance, like he's a god, right? He's a Hindu god. So what does dance, why is he the king of the dance? What does dance have to do with the Hindu religion?
That's a really good question. And probably more than what we can cover right now. But what's important for this sculpture and what's important for him being this lord of the dance is that he's actually doing this kind of cosmic dance, a Tandava or Tandavam dance, which brings about the destruction of the world, but really just so the world can be renewed. And so I always liken it to when I was a little kid, my granddad used to set fire to his front lawn and burn it so that the grass would grow up healthier and greener. It's the same thing where he's kind of dancing so swiftly and so intensely that everything's set on fire and the world gets destroyed, but so that the world can be renewed.
So the circle that he's located within is that fire?
Yes, it's a ring of fire, just like Johnny Cash. And really, it's also just a technique for the artisans that are making this. He's dancing so swiftly and so fast, and really you can think of it as a halo. And then all the little fires around it, like Agni, which is the Hindu god of fire. It's representing, he's dancing so fast, and it's almost the wheel has started in motion. It's really intense. It's really hot in there.
It's getting hot in here. So looking at him, further, as we've been standing here, I see a lot of little details that you don't notice when you're far away, but up close. For instance, he's got 4 arms, and one of his arms I see he's holding something. All of his arm placements seem very purposeful.
You're very clever. So I'm just going to kind of go to, if you're looking at it from the viewer's left, the top arm, he's holding a drum. It's called a damaru. And that drum is the drum that kind of gives that sweet beat that he's dancing the destructive dance in. And then below that, this open palm gesture, it's an abhaya mudra. A mudra is a symbolic or sacred hand gesture, and this mudra is saying no fear. And then this other arm that looks like it's pointing down to his foot is doing just that. He's saying, check out what I'm doing. And we'll kind of talk about that in a minute. And then the other hand that's stretched out actually, again, has a flame in it, and that's symbolic of Agni.
Well, since you brought up his feet, I've actually never really looked at his feet. I see that he's got the one foot kind of kicking up, but he's also standing on a small figure. That doesn't look too comfortable. What's going on there?
It's not very comfortable, but it's actually one of the most important aspects of this sculpture. So this tiny little guy that's kind of looking up at him like, hey, you're standing on me, that symbolizes ignorance. And it's Shiva is conquering ignorance. And when I say ignorance, I kind of mean that this whole world, even us just sitting here and talking, is all an illusion and a distraction from either your spiritual endeavors or kind of understanding the truth of the universe, and we just tend to be distracted by trivial matters. And this is Shiva overcoming that ignorance, overcoming our, desire to always be attached to, we'll just say, trivial existence. Keep it, and it's hopeful for us. Like, be a follower of Shiva, and you too will overcome trivial stuff.
Don't worry about your Instagram followers.
Yes.
Worry about your heart and soul.
Yeah, if we're being honest, that is an Instagram post.
Shiva would have, top Instagram poster for sure. Whatever they call it. Top Instagram influencer.
He'd have all the
For sure, all the followers.
And I've done this on tours before too, like, because this is a god and this is ideal beauty, say, how long can you stand in that pose? Because that is a pose that only a god can do.
I'll let you try the pose.
Okay, here I go.
So you mentioned the cobras, which I now see, but they're all over his body. There's one, it looks like, on his arm. There's one on his crown, or whatever you want to call whatever he's wearing on his head.
Sure.
But also the thing behind his head looks like a bunch of cobras. I'm not sure if it's what is that supposed to symbolize?
That is actually his hair.
Oh.
So Shiva is what we call an ascetic or a mendicant, which means he's a yogi, and he spends a lot of his time in the Himalayas, or Himalayas as they say. And Shiva spends all of his time meditating, and so he has locks. Because who has time to wash their hair, and it gets matted. And so as he's dancing, his locks are kind of like flaying around. And so if you zoom in, you're talking about these things in his hair, and when you zoom in, you'll see what I've heard a lot of people refer to as a mermaid. And that's actually the goddess Ganga. And Ganga is, so if you don't know, the river Ganges in India, which is, the holiest and most sacred rivers, is actually a living goddess named Ganga. And the way that the story goes is, and I'm going to really do a short version of this because it could take 2 years to tell it. There was a call hey, what's the word when there is no water?
A drought?
There was a drought in India, and they needed water, and essentially Ganga gets called down, we'll say, from the heavens or cosmos. And Ganga is also, like, she's sharp. She is a wild one. She's really cool and awesome. And she falls down. She's fallen to earth with, like, such ferocity. They're like, you're going to destroy Earth. Like, the impact of this great river, this water source. So Shiva kind of swoops in and then catches Ganga, or the Ganges River, in his hair, and then lays it down into India. And so you'll often see her in his locks during this dance, because remember, she almost destroyed the earth as well.
So what I'm hearing right now about the Hindu religion from what was the fire name?
Agni
and Ganga, is that teamwork really does make the dream work.
Yes.
Over here. So this isn't just a story about Shiva, but like his buddies and how they work together.
Teamwork does make the dream work. And in Hinduism, there's over 1 million gods.
Yes.
And even though there are what we say the religion of 1 million gods, it's something we call a polymonotheistic religion, which means even though there are several gods, they're really just manifestations of one god, Brahman. Also, maybe we should talk about the dating for this specific sculpture.
You mean the date that's written on the label?
Yes. Which is 2013.
Oh.
Yeah.
But Angie, the sculpture looks so old. I thought it was ancient.
There's a really good reason for that, Lana, and I'm so glad you brought up this point. So there, for over 1,000 years in southern India, in Tamil Nadu, they've made sculptures the same way since the Chola dynasty. And really even before that, the Chola dynasty is actually one of the longest dynasties really ever, but definitely in India. And they did lost wax cast, and the measurements are all the same. The way that they mold a god, everything about it is still done the same way. And so this sculpture, even though it is contemporary, was still done in the ancient, or really medieval, if we're thinking about the time period for the Cholas.
How did this get all the way over here?
That's a really fun story. I'm going to nerd out for a second. So the BMA itself, we have the Indian Cultural Society, and every 2 years we go over, the BMA and the Indian Cultural Society go over to India and tour, and on, it was maybe 2-3 trips back, southern India, Tamil Nadu. The Indian Cultural Society saw this specific sculpture. They get this sculpture and they're set and ready to ship it here to the United States so it can make it all the way to Birmingham, Alabama. But guess what? Remember how you said it looked super old and ancient? India thought the same thing as well. And the Archaeological Society in India and the government didn't let us bring the sculpture back because they thought it was something of antiquity. With a lot of help, it took almost a year. It made it through. And then it was shipped to the States. It was actually brought over by boat, took a train down here, then made its way to Birmingham, then had to be crane lifted into the sculpture garden, where then it was then bolted down here.
Now, if they've been making the same type of sculpture for years and years and years and years, were these sculptures meant to be outdoors? Were they ever indoors? Or is this how it's meant to be seen? Like, is this how you would see it if you came across it in India?
That is a really, really good one. Your typical sculpture of a Hindu deity, if it's in India, is meant for something called darshan. And darshan literally means seeing. And it's between the devotee and the sculpture itself. So I'm going to give you an example. If I have a bucket, that bucket is hollow and it's you're meant to put something in it. So you can think of a sculpture like this as an empty bucket. And you can invite the kind of like spirit of the deity. You can invite Shiva to go inside of the sculpture every once in a while for darshan. And whether a sculpture is inside of a temple or if the sculpture is in the privacy of someone's home, these sculptures are meant to be taken care of. You treat a Hindu deity like you would a guest in your home. You offer them food, you clothe them, you give them flowers. But a sculpture like this probably would have been paraded through the streets so that people that could never go inside of a temple or people that live far away, it would have been for like a festival. It would have been for some sort of parade. And it would have never been, I call this naked. It never would have been naked like this. It would have been adorned, covered in flowers. Did you learn anything new, Lana?
I did. I never actually knew about the other Hindu gods and goddesses that are so close to Shiva, which I think is really interesting. I also learned a lot about, I think it's very interesting that it's sort of forms a vessel. I like that because that's almost like just an interesting concept. I like the idea that at any point you could just be looking at it and Shiva could be inside of it, and you wouldn't even know. I think that's very hopeful.
It is very hopeful. So this has been Angie
and Lana,
and we were talking about art.